Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here to present the talk series exploring hidden African American history in partnership with the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy. This is a series of virtual presentations on three 19th century free Black communities in the New York region. The series accompanies the recent excavation of archaeological sites associated with William Voris, an African-American entrepreneur in the 19th century, which are located on the grounds of the Meeting House in Rye, New York. I would also like to take a minute to introduce our museum. The Lewis Latimer House Museum was the home to Black inventor Lewis Latimer from 1903 to 1928 in Flushing, Queens. He contributed to modern technologies, including the early elevator system, bathrooms and railroad cars, telephone, and most notably, the carbon filament light bulb. The Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy is an all-volunteer nonprofit in Rye, New York. And here I'm going to show just a quick photo of the meeting house for your reference. And so the Bird Homestead and Meeting House is dedicated to preserving its site along with the Forest Getney Archaeological Site, three adjoining historical properties located on the banks of the Blind Brook Estuary, and to conserving their coastal habitat while producing educational programs on history and ecology for the public. The Conservancy has received statewide awards for excellence in historic preservation and excellence in education. This program is funded in part by Humanities New York. Our speaker is Dr. Eugene Boesch. Dr. Boesch has undertaken archaeological investigations in the Hudson Valley area for over 44 years. He received a PhD and other graduate degrees from New York University. Dr. Boesch's work has primarily focused on indigenous cultures and adaptations in the eastern woodlands of North America and on Euro-American and 19th century settlement in the Hudson Valley region. He also has worked in Israel, California, and throughout the Midwestern United States. Most recently, his research interests have focused on researching and recording to historic American engineering record standards, mid-19th and early 20th century industrial complexes for the United States Environmental Protection Agency through its Superfund program. Dr. Boesch owns and operates a cultural resources and historic preservation consulting firm serving federal, state, local government, and private clients. Without further ado, I'll now pass it on to Dr. Boesch.
All right, thank you, Roxy. I just want to reiterate, I appreciate the co-sponsors of this program and the Bird Homestead and Meeting House Conservancy with the William Voris Archaeological Site on the Meeting House grounds, as Roxy said, and the Lewis Latimer House Museum. Without them, you wouldn't be hearing me here. So thank you both organizations. What you see here is an image of an early 20th century African-American individual who was a resident of the Hills. We'll talk about the Hills in a sec. This came from a 1985 publication that was put out by Westchester County that talks about a little bit about the history and the archaeology of the Hills area. It was done, as I said, in 85, 86. So at the time, Westchester County had a very clear view of how they wanted to preserve the area that subsequently became the Silver Lake Preserve in Harrison. The Hills initially is an area, a relatively large area that extends in parts of North Castle and White Plains and Harrison. You'll see at the bottom Silver Lake Preserve. Much of the red arrow area is the core area, which is the area known as the Hills, that area where most of the population in the mid to late 19th and early 20th century period resided. However, the larger area that was contributed to freed African American individuals by the Quakers beginning in the very late 18th century, extended to a much larger geographical area. Beginning in the mid 18th century, the Quakers at Purchase Meeting House and in New York City wanted to free their enslaved African Americans. They felt that their religion and philosophy made it incompatible to hold individuals in enslavement. So, the wheels grind slowly, but by 1767, they had made votes to free the individuals. They appointed committees to see how best to do this. It really started taking root right before the American Revolution, 1775, 1776, 1777. The war obviously retarded that approach, that movement. But by the end of 1779, or maybe a little bit afterwards, 1780, most of the African Americans that had been held in bondage were freed by the Quakers. In 1781, the Quakers organized a committee to try to see what was the best way to enable these individuals to live not only free lives on their own, but able to support themselves and be contributing to their own community. When you read the records, the historical records, it says that it implies that the Quakers donated the land to their freed former enslaved individuals. But what exactly that donation means is still a little unclear. They may have given individuals freedom to live still on the lands of their former owners. They may have given them lands that were not exactly the most productive, which was the area known as the hills. They may have charged some sort of rent or sort of as a tenant farmer or so. So it was really sort of unclear in these early years, late 18th, early 19th century, on exactly what all of that entailed. However, by the late 1830s, late 1840s, the African American community really started to prosper in the area that is known as the hills. As you see, the red arrow there is the hills core, as I had said. This other black arrow that you see up at the top, which points to something called Quaker Lane. That was another African American community, Brookfield community, that was, given at the same time as the area around the hills. But what we're going to focus on today is the hills area. This that you see here is really the boundaries of the hills. North is to the top. Buckout Road, which you see to the left, sort of curves around that red and white dashed road. It comes around, and then it's bordered on the south and east by the Lake Street area, and on the south by Silver Lake. So I don't know if you are familiar with looking at geographical topographic maps, but you could see the close lines there that show this is very rocky, very hilly, very elevated kind of terrain. So as we said, it's not the most the most productive, although it became productive, but initially it was not the most productive type of landscape. The green arrow that you see at the bottom, I only show you that because that represents one of the last battles of the Battle of White Plains during the Revolutionary War in 1776. And during that war, during that period of 1776, 1777, the area that was known as the Hills was the location of a lot of American encampments, patriot encampments during the war. So there was a lot of activity going on there even before the African Americans came onto that scene. The dashed yellow line that you see there, that's roughly the route of the prime road that went through the hills, called Stony Hill Road. And the archaeology that we did there, was done in 1989 as part of a proposed development, residential development that was going to destroy and disturb this one site. So compliance laws at the time required that some archaeology be done to try to preserve or excavate as much as possible the house site that was going to be impacted. That was the house site of an individual named David Gall, who I'll tell you more about in a sec. But his house approximately was located where that bluish purple lavender colored arrow is. The other more important thing, or one of the other more important things about the hills, is that the community of the hills, beginning in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, was a very cohesive unit, a very cohesive community. It not only had at least two grocery stores, it had a population of about 200 individuals. There were at least 20 to 25 houses by mid-century along that Stony Hill Road. So it was a very cohesive community, and it was one that was anchored on the African American church, the Zion Church, the Methodist Zion Church, which was located along Bucks Hollow Road. The church was built in the 1840s. There's variations of dates, anywhere between 1840s and 1860s, but from what I've seen and from documentary and other sources, it probably was up by the mid to late 1840s. And then there was a graveyard associated with it. The graveyard has about approximately ranges from 2 to 400 individuals buried there. Personally, I think it probably contains more. It's very difficult to ascertain the exact number. The terrain, as I said, is very rocky and very hilly. Most of the identifiable grave sites are just marked, monumentally marked by upright stones. Most of them do not have any markings on them. They're just glacial erratics that were just placed upright as monuments to the interment. There are some stones there that do have markings on them, but very few. And those may be associated with husband and wife or other family members. But again, it's just a handful. The others that are mostly marked were those of veterans who fought in the Civil War on the Union side. They were awarded tombstones after the war. The government gave all veterans tombstones, so they put them up here. This is the Stony Hill Cemetery. You can go along Buckout Road, and you can see there's a little turnoff, and you can walk there. It's been sort of under construction for the last 5 or 6 years, being privately funded, but it certainly is a nice little trail that goes through there. This is the trail leading to the cemetery. These are some of the upright markers that we had said that had no real clear identification on them, but they are graves nonetheless. These are one of the Civil War veterans monuments. Much better. They were provided by the government. Whether or not there are actually any human remains left is problematic. The soil here is very acidic. So the actual human remains, the bones themselves, may have been, disturbed, not disturbed, it may have eroded away, dissolved away. But you would get other things. You would get buttons from clothing that they wore. If they were in coffins, you might find nails associated with the wooden coffin. Not that they should ever be excavated, but from past experience I've had with other burial sites, those tend to be the items that are remaining. And sometimes you do get some fragmentary bone still there. This is a picture of the church, the African American church next to the cemetery. This church burnt down in 1894, I believe. But here you have a family on an outing on Sunday, probably. Again, this I show you again just to remind you that Gall house is the purple arrow, and the black arrow points to Stony Hill Road, which enters from Lake Street, again, the core road of the community. The community of the Hills is a very rough and tumbled. As I mentioned, it's a very sort of undulating terrain with exposed bedrock, knolls, escarpments, smaller cliffs, and other things. But periodically through them, you'll see the remains of human habitation, the African Americans. Here you have a part of a stone wall adjacent to a house wall. A stone wall probably was used for keeping animals penned or so. Here you have other terrain. Again, this is just gives you an idea of the general area of what it looks like. So again, you can walk through there, and I encourage you all to walk through there whenever you can. Perhaps now is not the best time because the brush is pretty thick and there's a lot of ticks and poison ivy, but certainly in the fall, it's a pleasant walk because you're walking through history and you can see African American history all around you there. So so I encourage you to do that. This tends to be the central portion of the Stony Hill or Silver Lake Preserve. Here you can see some other walking trails that go through there. I don't know if you can see in the center of this picture, there's this L-shaped stone wall which is associated with another house. This is the Battle of White Plains, the monument that I talked to you about, Merritt Hill. Okay, so this map here dates to 1850, a map of Westchester County. That squiggly road that you see in the middle, you see the names J.W. Carpenter, Hops, and whatnot. That's Buckout Road, which I mentioned to you before. Buckout Road to the right is going into Lake Street. So that's the core area of the hills, but Stony Hill is not shown on this map. So apparently by 1850, that road had not been put in to the extent that it warranted being identified on the map. It probably was there as some sort of a trail. It may have been in earlier African Native American period trail, like Lake Street was. So there probably was something that went through there, but it wasn't improved on or anything. It probably was just sort of a larger game trail. The area to the upper left, that Negro Hills, that probably is that Brookvale community, which I mentioned to you earlier. You can see also on the map, Silver Lake is referred to as St. Mary's Lake. It goes by a number of different names. You can see on this map too, Buckout Road, and as you are going up the roller coaster of Buckout Road and then steeply coming down before it makes a dog leg, you can see it says the African American Methodist House. So that's their church area. So so basically the Silver Lake, actually the Stony Hill Road would have extended sort of where from Foster is on the Lake Street, sort of cutting diagonally across towards that African American church area. Here we have a little bit later, 1868 map. You can see Stony Hill Road, the red red arrow points to Stony Hill Road. You can see how it sort of squiggles back and forth. It's passing through all the terrain areas that were impassable. That's why you get such a crooked road. The arrow is pointing to D. Gall, David Gall's house. So so he's there already by 1868. He wasn't there in the 1850s, nor were those other individuals. But between early 1850s and mid to late 1860s, the population along Stony Hill Road expanded tremendously. You can still see St. Mary's Lake. You can also see the African church as shown there. There's other things of interest. Stevens Store on one end and H. Foster's store on the other. There's also a sawmill, which you can sort of see sort of center right. That apparently was owned by an African American who resided in the hills. That squiggly road, from the African American church going all around to Lake Street, that is Buckout Road. And again, that's squiggly like that because it's bypassing all the harder terrain like that. Here we go again, 1872, basically the same. Some of the names changed, but Mr. Gall is still in residence in 1872. This one is 1881. Mr. Gall is still there. But what is of interest is when you look towards the right along Buckout Road, you'll see a house of another D. Gall. So that could be another David Gall. He could have had another house. That could have been his son's house. He could have rented a house. And I say that because the census data, excuse me, from this period shows that Gall himself was a fairly prosperous individual. When you look at the, I'll show you this. This is around 1890. Gall is still there, Gall, and Gall is still there along Buckout Road to the right. But this is what I wanted to show you. This is a 1870 census, which shows David Gall. It shows he was 49 years old in 1870. He's listed as a laborer, his occupation. And the next column over where you have $500, that column represents value, estate value. So most of the names on this census, they did not have enough to warrant any sort of number being placed there. But Gall, had $500 worth of real estate and property value. So he was a fairly lucrative individual. When you say laborer at this time, that doesn't necessarily mean laborer in our own idea of what a laborer is, just a common laborer going out doing all the shoveling and the hard work and whatnot, which could very well be, but it also implied if you were a carpenter or had some sort of other expertise, a stone worker or a mill worker or other things, you would also be frequently categorized just as a laborer. You could see above that, Mary is just living at home. The other one keeps house, and the other ones are laborers. So you can't think of a laborer in terms of just what we would today. So obviously Gall was fairly well off, as shown by some of the archaeology that we saw. He was well off because one of the artifacts that we did recover, and I'll go more into the archaeology in a little bit, was this NYC button, which stands for New York Central Railroad. So it's possible he was a laborer for the railroad. It's possible he worked as a conductor on the railroad. It's possible he had another job with the railroad. The railroad at this time was not too far away. It was in White Plains, but it would have been relatively easy for him to travel the 4 or 5 miles to the station to get to work, if that was indeed one of his occupations. By the early 20th century, this map is 1911. Unfortunately, by this time, much of the Stony Hill community had left, particularly on the one side of Stony Hill Road, which is shown by that red arrow. Estates had taken the place. Speculators had come in. Estates had been built. Individuals had much larger parcels of land than before. Individuals on the other side of Stony Hill Road, they still probably were African Americans, although their names are different. Obviously, it's 20 years, 25 years later. but the family names are different. But the point is that this land is starting to be removed from African American control. The interesting thing, where the red arrow points to, shows the Gall house. That would be where David Gall's house was, and it still shows the structure there, but it doesn't identify any ownership of that. So what that means, I do not know. Some additional research in property deeds might show, but whether that is still owned by Gall and his not by Gall himself, but maybe by his offspring or other relatives, is unknown. In my experience, when a house is just shown there within a property deed area, but no name is assigned, it generally meant that the house was abandoned and unoccupied as of that time. This is Lake Street, which you see, Old Lake Street, which is what you see, the old road. It's an old 19th century house on the right. This is Stony Hill Road as of 1989, when we started doing the archaeology. So you could see that the road is modestly improved, probably enough for a cart, maybe two carts could pass by in some locations, but it was a generally an improved stone path. Here's another part of the road. You can see it's going right along the edge of an escarpment or a terrain drop off. And that was sort of on the east side of Stony Hill Road. The west side of Stony Hill Road, as you get closer to that African church, you can see here there are bluestone and slates that were placed along the road to ease movement along the road. So this community banded together and did this themselves. The town and the county at the time were not improving the road for them. It was the local members of the community that were doing this. Here's another portion of the road in the north section. Again, another section of the road in the northern part. Unfortunately, this is the southern part of Stony Hill Road. In 1989, when myself and my crew were doing the archaeology there, this was just a dirt track connecting to Old Lake Street there, and we were able to drive up there to where the site was, maybe about a little bit less than a half mile further up. But now this has become part of the estate development in Harrison. So now this is a private road with no longer direct access to the archaeology site. This is again, forgive these pictures, in 1989. So this is a dark and gloomy day only taken, but you can see the house foundation here on a better day. More recently, I took this picture. You can see the house itself. There's an addition on the right. The stones are really fairly thick and robust. It probably was at least a two-story structure. We did the archaeology, as I said. We surveyed around the house. We found this cistern, water retention feature, how Mr. Gall was getting his water. We knew it was a cistern, not a well. A well, you want to keep water coming into the well from groundwater or other things. Cistern, you get water up there. This was right next to the side of his house, so he was probably collecting water, rainwater, from his gutters of his house from the second floor. But the bottom of it was mortar covered. Then the sides also plastered with mortar, again to make it watertight, to keep the water inside. That's how we knew it was a cistern. This is a privy, an outhouse. This was a wood box privy, quite common at the time. Much of it, had been decayed, and archaeologists always want to look for privies, cisterns, and even wells, because those are holes in the ground, and once those the use life of those features is over, they become convenient places to store your trash, to throw your garbage. Remember, you didn't have trash pickup every Monday and Wednesday. So all the garbage that you accumulated, would either go into middens, garbage dumps, it's somewhere, in the vicinity of your house, or they would fill up these kinds of features with trash. Here's another privy, a little bit earlier one than the last one I saw. You could still, if you have good archaeology eyes, there is the wood lining around the side of it. We did these what are called shovel tests, these smaller tests, maybe 2 by 2 feet in size, rather than larger tests, 5 by 5 feet in size. And we did find there was still a lot of activity going on below ground that we didn't have time to excavate, to explore. This probably is part of another outbuilding. You can see 2, 3 stones. The rule of thumb in archaeology: if you hit 1 stone, it's a rock. If you hit 2 stones, it's a coincidence. If you hit 3 stones, it's a wall. And so this is another wall, buried wall that was associated with this house. It could have been an outbuilding for animals, or it could have been an outbuilding for cooking, or a smokehouse, or other activities. What we did also find in this area, though, was a penny, a 1926 penny. So again, this is well after Gall was gone. This was someone was wandering around the area in the 20s and dropped this 1926 penny there. Here's another wall associated with Gall. It seems to be a wall associated with animals that he had kept, probably horses and a couple cows. In the basement of his house, we also found a brick fireplace that would have provided heat to the upper stories of the house. You can see the burning associated with that. The bricks themselves are classic mid-19th century bricks. Archaeologists can look at brick and give you a general time period. Gall's house had 3 different types of bricks. This is one of the earlier bricks. It's cruder. It has a lot of inclusions in it. It's a little bit more crumbly. By 1870, bricks are starting to be made with these recessed surfaces. Those recessed surfaces are called frogs. Why they're called frogs is a whole other story, but it just helps you when you're mortaring your bricks together. So they're just plain recessed surfaces. These frog bricks go from 1870 to maybe about 1885. After late 1880s, early 1890s, the brick makers, and all these bricks come from the Hudson Valley, Kingston area, Newburgh area, or that location. By 1890s, early 1890s, we're starting to find at the Gall's house these Staples bricks. Staples was a brick maker that was there from like 1885 to like 1905. So again, it shows different periods of occupation based on the brick at the Gall house. We also found in the lower level a brick floor. The brick floor seemed pretty early, probably 1860-ish. And underneath the brick floor, there were, some artifacts, diagnostic, datable artifacts that confirmed that 1860-ish date. We also, as we were dismantling part of the wall to do the archaeology testing, we found it's very difficult to build up in the hills because of the rocky, uneven nature of the terrain. But we were able to see the engineering genius of Mr. Gall, because he was able to build like wooden platforms on top of the uneven ground, and then on top of that build his stone foundation. So again, it was not something that is discussed very often about the engineering geniuses at the hills when you're reading the history of the location. We also, again, just give you archaeology. We also found in the vicinity of his house in the backyard. Very sort of complex stratigraphy. Where the trowel is, the tool at the bottom, that yellowish soil, that yellowish soil was deposited 15, 16,000 years ago by the last glaciation before humans were here. So obviously that would not contain any artifacts. Above that, there is an 18th century surface, probably just right before the African Americans came to the hills. Above that, you also see another yellow layer, but again, that yellow layer has to do with the construction of the Gall house. When they dug out the Gall house foundation, they had encountered the yellow soil that you see all the way at the bottom. So what did they do with it? They just threw it around and spread it around. So you have this layer of fill like that, of redeposited glacial soil. And then on top of that, you have what's called a plow zone, an agricultural zone, suggesting that there was a garden or so in the backyard of Gall's house. So again, a very complex site and a very complex occupation. Also, in the hills area themselves, this was not directly associated with Gall's house, but there were these root cellars, so to speak. Some call them chambers, stone chambers. They were along the Stony Hill Road. These mainly were used in the mid-late 19th century for storage of foodstuffs. They also were frequently used for storage of milk that was gotten, during the day, during early morning from local milk cows, and then the milk would be stored here until a cart would come by, and then the cart would collect the milk and take it to White Plains or Harrison for the local milk run down to Manhattan to New York City to bring the milk from Westchester to New York City. In the back of Gall's house, also, we found another one of these upright stones. Again, I'm not saying it's a burial. We didn't look at it. We didn't touch it. It could be a burial, or it could be he could have buried his dog there, or it could just be a natural upright stone that got pushed up by trees growing over the last couple centuries. But it is known that there was the African American church, which is identified. There was another smaller cemetery within the hills area, and some of the other houses, particularly those occupied prior to 1850, did have some what appear to be informal tomb monuments in their backyards. So probably prior to the African American church and cemetery being formed, individuals who passed away would be buried on their own properties in the backyard. That's a topic that, research topic that really hasn't been fully explored. From the Gall's house too, we find a fair amount of artifacts. These are all what's called refined earthenware or whiteware. These would have been everyday items. They're not the most expensive, but they're not the cheapest ones. They're sort of a mid-range in terms of cost. This is a little bit more expensive. These are brown transfer printed whitewares. They start coming in the 1840s, but they're used all through the 1850s, 1860s. You can purchase them. So again, it shows that Gall, while he was living generally off of the less expensive stuff like we all do, he did have special ceramics that probably he used for special occasions, such as these. This is like another transfer printed whiteware pattern, but this definitely would have been used for special occasions. Also, his connections to pottery manufacturers seems to be fairly widespread. This anchor pottery, anchor pots were made in Trenton. So how it got up to his house, whether they were selling them in White Plains, whether he was able to get them in the city if he was working as a conductor, or whether he had family and friends who sent them to him from Anchor Pottery in Trenton, because Anchor Pottery was a very well-known pottery during the mid to late 19th century. We also found, surprisingly, intact these two jugs. They were in his basement in the corner, and they were covered over with dirt, but they were not really broken. You have this on the left, you have this redware, red earthenware, clear lead glazed jug, probably for for wine or harder spirits. On the right, you have what's called an Albany slip jug, probably also for wine or some other sort of alcoholic beverage. But these were, these were fairly intact condition. Then we also had other run-of-the-mill ceramics. These are stoneware. You may not be able to see it if you see our blurb, but there's a maker's mark on the right shirt that says Rossman and McKinty. They were druggists from Hudson, New York. So, apparently he was getting some medication, from a Hudson, New York druggist. Here you have 2 milk bottles. These are late 19th century. The bottles themselves, the way that they were manufactured, they were probably around 1890 to 1895 or so. There were 1 quart each. They both have names of dairies on them from Tarrytown. Here you have another a beer bottle. The seam that you see running up ends at the neck and the rim. That's what's called separately applied rim. That probably dates to about 1870-ish or so. So, we had a wide range of ceramics. What have we here? Oh, this is Matthews from Hempstead, Long Island. It was also a beer bottle. So, how he's getting, stuff from Hempstead, again, probably due to connections in New York City. This would date probably to the late third quarter, 1875 or thereabouts of the 19th century. Here you have something from Pine Falls, New York State. Not only did Mr. Gall imbibe sometimes, apparently, but he also liked his crystal clear, pure water. So this is pure water from Pines Falls, New York. There's a 2-gallon jug, I believe, 2-gallon glass. The stopper would have been a ceramic stopper. It's gone. This would have been made sometime between 1875 and 1900. After 1900, this company switched over to making carbonated water with different types of stoppers. Before that, it was just this spring water. So it's very datable that way. Other general artifacts that we found: pewter spoon, portions of a smoking pipe, which may predate Gall, and then a buckle, probably from a shoe. Unfortunately, the spoon, like most 19th century individuals, they had a lot of contact with copper, either in their pewter spoons or in their clear lead glazed ceramics. So, they were probably ingesting a fair amount of lead. Here we found also in their property, on Gall's property, milk jugs. These are milk containers. So near where his those walls were that may have had his animals. So they would have been used to collect his milk, which he probably then sold to New York City. Other farm implements, these are from horses, from saddles and other things. Also children's artifacts, which I found interesting. There's no indication of Gall's family, but he certainly could have had children. Here you have a clay and a glass marble. You have a doll's arm, and you have a wagon wheel. Here you have a tin whistle. Here you have a lock with a key mechanism. These are mid-19th century. These things tend to disappear as combination locks come in the late 1860s, 1870s. Slate pencil. He was literate individual. Nails, square cut nails, again, typical mid-19th century. Square nails, again, that were reused. You can see their corroded condition.
The bent one there got bent as it was being pulled out of a board or so for reuse. If you were in front of me, I would ask you to guess what this is, but you're not in front of me. So this is either a shutter pull or a draw pull. It's like a copper alloy. We also found on his property this saw cutter. So it shows that he was doing his own, or at least someone in the area was doing their own lumbering and cutting of trees and planks. Excuse me. We also found a fair amount of domesticated animal bone. Here you see some chicken remains. You see some goat. There's some probably young cow. So he had a fairly good meat-based protein diet. Here you have cow teeth. Shell. We found a fair amount of shellfish. There's oysters. There's hard shell clam that were there. Again, Harrison's not too far from Long Island Sound, so he probably was into some sort of a trading network with Harrison and points further to the east. We took soil samples and from some of the features that we took, and what we did with those dirt is we did what's called flotation. You drop the dirt into water. Everything that's less dense than water floats to the surface. You skim it off, you dry it, and what you see here are the remnants of that. Each one of those dots represent a seed or a piece of charcoal or a piece of nutshell. There's a lot of background noise from the weeds and other vegetation that grew around him, but we did get some indication that there were some peach pits fragments in here. There were some black walnut fragments. There were some strawberry seeds in there. So, again, it did show a fairly wide, variety of his diet. We also found Native American artifacts. Can't get away without talking to them about them. The projectile point that you see up on the right dates probably to about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. It's sort of an Orient fishtail, and then the other two pieces you see there are just debitage from manufacturing of other stone tools. And then I'll leave you a second to read this. This was written by a former member of Silver Lake, a resident there, who wrote this in 1909. So I'll shut up. Oh, okay. In summary, I just want to say that prior to the excavations at Stony Hill, there was a sort of a stereotypical view that individuals that were in that community were, very poor and impoverished, and some of them probably, most certainly were, but others seem to have a lifestyle, an economic lifestyle that was fairly elevated for the time. The community was a cohesive whole, an organic whole among themselves, able to not only provide support to other members of the community, but to have a vibrant neighborhood with stores, churches, community interactions to build roads and to repair things. It's a different world. I mean, when Gall was first coming there, and maybe a decade before him, I mean, you still had, Fugitive Slave Act in force. You still had, other egregious laws that would have presented a threat to the Stony Hill community. Not only direct racism like that, but there was also, systematic racism from, the state governments and the local community governments. So, in many ways, the Stony Hill community, was not happy, but was content to have their own community within their own universe or so, if you want. But that's not to say they didn't have interactions with local whites. The kids went to a school in Harrison that was desegregated at the time. There were a number of letters in support of pensioners, widows from the Civil War to collect their their pensions that were written by white neighbors. So they did have interactions with white neighbors in the Harrison and White Plains community that were not detrimental to them, but still I think that they had that cohesive church unit and neighborhood unit themselves as a as something that was successful for their community, and they didn't want to change that. And unfortunately, things only started to change with the end of the 19th and into the early 20th century, as Westchester just in general started to grow and to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and land became more and more valuable, no matter what what kind of condition it was in. A lot of the individuals who came and took these estates were people from the city that wanted a country existence. So the roughness of the terrain didn't necessarily bother them, particularly since their houses would have generally faced onto the major roads. So that's it. I just want you to know that if you want more information about the hills, you can go to a number of sources. The New York, excuse me, the Charles Dawson Library in Harrison, pretty close to the Hills area, has a huge collection of Hills documents and census and maps and other data. The Westchester County Historical Society, or the Westchester County Archives, also has a lot of material. If you are more widespread and adventurous, you can look at the Library of Congress. There's some information on the hills there in the Library of Congress. And certainly, if you're interested in a good overview, Edith Quinn, a professor at Oneonta College, I believe, has written recently on African Americans from the hills and their roles during the Civil War. So I would encourage you to look her up, Quinn, Edith, and you would get much more in-depth information specifically relating to the hills as it existed during that period of the Civil War and immediately afterwards. So thank you, Roxy.
Thank you, Dr. Boesch, and thank you for your extensive presentation. For anyone who has viewed this program, if you enjoy the content, please consider joining us for our next talk. Again, this is a series of virtual talks where we explore hidden African American history. Our next talk will be on the history of Little Liberia in Bridgeport, Connecticut, on September 22nd, at the same time from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. EST. And thank you so much again, Dr. Boesch.
Yes, and please, if you have any questions, Roxy is happy to share my contact information, or I can give it to you. And if you have any questions, I've been getting some questions from other individuals who have listened to this talk before. So please email me at ejboesch, BOESCH, at bestweb, one word, BESTWEB.net. So that's ejboesch at bestweb.net.
Thank you.
All right.